Nicole, who's the VP of Microsoft Teams and the M365 platform. Nicole's worked at Microsoft for over 20 years in different leadership roles on Microsoft Azure, Visual Studio, SharePoint, and Project. Nick Feit over at the end there, the CEO and co-founder of Rec Room. Rec Room is a cross-platform community for people to build and play games together. Before starting Rec Room, Nick also worked at Microsoft on various games and also HoloLens. And then Jules Urbach, the CEO of OTOY, which he started in 2008. OTOY is a cloud graphics company that's used by visual effects studios and artists to create incredible visuals and media. So I'm really excited to talk about the evolution of physical and digital spaces with all of you who've been working in this space for at least a decade, everyone. Personally, my spaces have changed a lot over the last 2 years. Whether we're putting on AR glasses or just staring at our computer screens, I spend about 80% of my day on a Zoom call. And then after hopping off my Zoom calls, I watch Disney Plus videos with my 2-year-old son. So whether we're actually wearing headsets or just staring at screens, the way that we interact with technology is obviously changing a lot. So to get us started, you've all been working on these different products for over a decade. What are some of the broader trends and insights that you're seeing about how our work and personal lives are changing? Maybe we can start down at the end with you, Nick.
Sure. I think I can talk more about how our personal lives are changing, probably less than how our work is changing. Most of the audience for our app Rec Room is in their teen years. And I think the thing that we are seeing is that video games are eating a lot of the consumer internet. You know, I think video games 10, 15 years ago were about jumping from platform to platform, maybe collecting gold coins, maybe staring down a gun in a first-person shooter. But I think right now, if you talk to your kids and what they're doing in games, it's about socializing, it's about fashion, it's about events, dating, music. So many more things are now falling under the category of gaming, and I think you're seeing a generation explore the internet not in a browser, but something that looks a lot more like a video game.
Nicole?
Let me go. So, I mean, if you think about 2020, the people who are now coming back into the office are very different than the people they were 2 years prior or 2.5 years prior. And some of the things that we see and hear all the time from our customers is that they now want flexibility. Employees want flexibility about where, how, and even when they work. It's not even just the location per se, it's just we've fundamentally changed. We've seen that we can be productive working remote, and so flexibility is king. And in light of that, what does that mean? My employees, myself, I want to be able to choose which days I go into the office and which days I work from home. And, Mondays and Fridays, I like to work from home. And if my employer makes me actually come into the office, you see, some dissonance and people willing to leave their jobs. We also have seen trends which we call the triple peak day, where now people really shift when they work. So maybe you work in the morning, then you work after lunch, but then you take off. A lot of working parents are now saying, I want to pick up my kids from school. I want to go to their soccer game. After dinner, I'm going to get back online and I'm going to work in a way that's flexible for me as a human being. And so another pretty notable shift in this kind of environment of kind of remote and hybrid work. And then the last big thing I'd call out is well-being. People are way more focused on their overall well-being, and that has very much been influenced by the changes we've felt and experienced as we've moved to kind of these remote work environments. And over 50% of people are willing to prioritize health and well-being over work. And so those are some of the big changes we think and trends we've seen in the work environment.
Any thoughts, Jules?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say from our even working on this project, we were able to bring in so many people because work from home is a thing. Once we did it with our core employees, then it was like, well, we can just bring in all the top talent in the world and they could just join the team. And those systems are in place now. We're never going back. So that's been an eye-opener, and it's definitely something that's changed in the last few years for us.
Yeah, we'll love to double click on some of these. Nick, over the last few years, obviously this metaverse narrative has gotten really, really big. How has the world of gaming really changed? Is online multiplayer gaming different now than it was 10 years ago? What are some of the surprising things that you're seeing?
I think if you rewound time and looked at the the transition in the internet from, a sort of passive consumption where I was going to a website, I was looking at some sort of information, to websites that now are taking my information. I'm going on there, I'm contributing photos, videos, thoughts. That's most of the websites that we go to now. I have some participatory role in the creation of the website. I think you're seeing games adopt that. Most of the games that you used to go to, you were going and experiencing some narrative, some creative experience that was someone else's vision. But I think with the rise of games like Roblox and Minecraft and even Fortnite Creative, you're seeing more and more games embracing user-generated content. The people that are going into the games are contributing more and more of the content to the games. And I think it's showing that the games themselves can have a much longer lifespan in that they can have a much larger moat. They don't have the hits-driven nature of like a movie. They have the evergreen nature of some of the Web 2 websites that have become really, really dominant now. And I think you're seeing that happen in games. Is like it's far more participatory for the people that go there.
Makes a lot of sense. And do you think that's the trend that gaming is moving in, and eventually all games follow that path, or is this just an expansion of the market for gaming?
I think if you look at the financial structure of gaming companies, it's actually hard to avoid. Games are very, very expensive to build, and one of the things that gives you long legs and allows you to have an evergreen title is having some sort of IP that your players can interact with over years, something that can evolve with culture, something that can jump on zeitgeisty meme moments. Like, I think if it's a printed disc that never changes, you don't get that benefit. But I think you can see things like Minecraft have they're going on a decade now and they're stronger than ever. And I think it's because they've been able to evolve with culture and adapt to the players that come to them. So I think there's almost a financial imperative that if you want to compete in this market, you're going to be competing against folks that are getting a lot of content very cheaply through user-generated content mechanisms. And so if you are not going to go that route, you need to have a mechanism for having really, really high-quality content. And I think you're seeing the world sort of diverging into two paths in gaming. You're seeing extremely expensive AAA content like Call of Duty, or you're seeing these more services-based social user-generated content games, because those are kind of the only things that can financially compete.
Makes sense. Nicole, maybe double-clicking into work world over the last 10, 20 years, how has the vision and the priorities for Microsoft Office, Microsoft Teams kind of changed in this world where we're working remotely a lot more often?
Yeah, I mean, we always have built our technologies to be focused on productivity and collaboration. Teams, Microsoft Teams I work on, we never built it to be like a video-only tool. I think video conferencing became so popular during the pandemic because we all needed to connect. But we really see the world where people need to connect, whether it's meetings, calling, collaborating, even just doing business all in one location. And so we've just seen those trends heighten over the last couple of years and beyond. And, we have seen some notable shifts, like people have so much meeting fatigue. They can't be in video calls for endless hours. And so more and more of our users are shifting to asynchronous work. How do they work, offline or at a time where it's, conducive for their time zone or their work patterns. And so that's been one really big shift. We also see a lot of use of AI kind of infused into the technology so that end users can be very productive. They can just kind of jump to the specific section in a meeting recording where their name was referenced and then take that action that was automatically designated to them. So that type of effort or that type of technology helps people be more productive and also reduce some of that kind of maybe meeting fatigue. And then maybe the other thing that I would just call out that we see, I'd say an increased focus of our technologies are just kind of the overall well-being, how we can, get people to recognize you can have focus time and that be automatically, integrated in your tools and technologies. Even Outlook, for scheduling your meetings. By default, meetings can start 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later, just once again to help this kind of always-on culture to have these natural breaks. So just, I'd say a lot of big changes in the sense of kind of thinking about broader collaboration patterns changing and then also well-being patterns changing.
Makes a lot of sense. Jules, any thoughts? I think OTOY was founded in 2008.
Yeah.
What are the types of things that you're seeing changing in like the last couple of years that really?
Well, going back to Fortnite, it's so interesting because Fortnite is this exceptionally, it didn't start off successfully, right? I mean, it was once it figured out the sort of social aspects of monetization. I mean, now Epic is putting the Unreal Engine, right? You're referring to a creator inside of Fortnite, so users can actually make their own games. I mean, that's the closest thing I've seen to something approaching the metaverse, but also user-generated content. I think the way that Fortnite's doing it is going to be really big. I think, of course, Roblox is that same model. I mean, 10 years ago, Unity, Roblox, and Epic being tens of billions of dollars, being valued at that was hard to imagine. I think now it's a lot easier, and I think that also points to the future. There's also some interesting things too, where you see you see things like Fortnite becoming more mainstream. Their DC and Marvel comic books, they intersect with the Fortnite story. So they are building an IP and a narrative and all of that. And so I think Fortnite in particular shows some of the very big differences from games and even social experiences of 10 years ago versus today. That's my thoughts.
Makes sense. I shared this graphic from Gartner with all of you about the 13 elements of a metaverse, which include everything from digital currency and NFTs to workplace and natural language processing. I couldn't really understand like what all these elements really required, but we'd love to hear from you. How has this metaverse narrative changed the way that you guys think about businesses? Are your customers are people coming to Microsoft and asking, how do we get access to this metaverse? Are Rec Room users saying this is a cool app because it feels like it's part of the metaverse? How is the narrative changing the work that you're actually doing? Jules, if you wanted to.
Well, I was going to start by just saying that, ever since Meta became Meta, that word has become poisoned. So I've been in meetings where I've been told our company will never call this the metaverse. We're calling it omniverse. I mean, you just had Tim Cook saying we are never going to call whatever we're doing the metaverse. So, I mean, Neil Stephenson's book, bless him, it was a great idea. It's a great story. And I think the idea of the metaverse is 3D spatial web. It still holds. It's just you'll never use that word by multi-trillion-dollar companies. It's just now poisoned because one of them decided they were going to try to own it. Just saying that's my experience in the metaverse in this past year.
Do you want me to go? Yeah, I mean, metaverse is a buzzword at this point, and it's got a lot of exciting things tied to it. It also has a lot of negative connotations tied to it. There is an insane amount of customer interest. Every single customer conversation I go into, every CEO is saying, how should I be investing? What's the future of the metaverse? How does it apply to my organization? But they have literally no clue what to do about it. Like they don't know, how to apply it. And so we're spending a lot of time with what we call early adopter customers, saying, what are the scenarios? What are the problems you're trying to solve? One of our early customers in this area is Accenture. And they came to us and they said, one of our biggest problems is onboarding and training our employees. We bring in tens of thousands of employees every year. We send them to this place called St. Charles in Illinois. And guess what? It's super expensive. And during COVID, they actually couldn't bring those employees to that location. And so we co-developed in partnership with them these immersive spaces where people could connect. They could do training. They could build both social capital and, education and learning. And so I think the key thing, especially in the work environment, is what are the problems they're trying to solve? What are those hero scenarios? And then really kind of developing them. Because we know it's made a big impact in gaming and it's absolutely coming to the work environment. But there's a lot of hype with lacking a lot of clarity as well about what and how to use the technology.
So to start, Rec Room, it's an online world made up of about 15 million different rooms, and those rooms can be anything. They can be games, they can be escape rooms, they can be speed dating rooms, they can be self-help rooms. So these rooms are built by players using either a modified version of the Unity engine or in-game tools, kind of like the way you build in Minecraft. So the term metaverse gets applied to Rec Room a lot. I would say we don't apply it to ourselves all that often. I think a lot of times where people are using that term right now, they are trying to get some sort of halo or buzz effect. And I think if you dig a bit deeper in terms of what's actually going on, I think the things that you're seeing are metaverse aside, there are big trends that are worth investing in. I don't think the metaverse by itself I don't think anyone should be like, what should my company do in the metaverse? I think people should look at like, hey, how can my company engage with, 3D worlds? How can I engage in gaming? How can I engage a younger demographic that's not in browsers and apps? I think that's an interesting question. I think the other thing that we've seen is, and this is kind of some of the things that we've talked about with this panel of digital spaces, somewhat taking the space of some physical spaces. Like when I was a 12 or 13-year-old and I would come home from school, the place that I would go to meet up with my friends was like a cul-de-sac or somebody's backyard or somebody's basement. Like there was a physical place where we came together. And I think we're seeing increasingly for younger kids that space is somewhere in the digital realm. It's in a video game. They are not going somewhere else. Like the space they're going is a video game. And if you are a company that is trying to engage that demographic, you need to shift your focus from physical to digital to reach that group. Some of the partnerships that we've done so far are with the NBA and the NFL. So with the NBA during the playoffs, they built a large room where you could buy virtual jerseys to wear for your team. There was a playoff grid where you could enter your own picks and discuss which team you thought was going to win, and then the winners of this like bracket competition got virtual prizes. This is a really great way of engaging a group that's not probably going to ESPN.com, and I think you're seeing more and more brands look at, okay, the way we've traditionally engaged these groups is going to have to change.
That's a great point. Probably for most people in this room when we were kids or teenagers, for me it was like if you wanted to play video games with someone, you had to bring your controller or bring your console to their house. To take the metaverse and the innovation question from a different angle, what are some of the things that have happened over the last decade to enable these types of digital experiences? Jules, maybe you can talk about some of the key breakthroughs that we've had.
I mean, I think that for us, we're showing the kinds of graphics we're rendering. There's hardware ray tracing, which allows us in real time to deliver cinematic quality. NVIDIA introduced that. Imagination Technologies used to supply that. It's now becoming more common in graphics cards. The cloud is a huge part of that as well. I mean, if you don't have the capacity to render something on a phone, even though we do now, it's still faster in the cloud. The data can stream from the cloud. Streaming into augmented reality, into holographic displays, into a browser is a key part of what makes the metaverse happen. I was here, 13 years ago showing cloud gaming, cloud rendering, but now I feel that's absolutely necessary to deliver the kinds of experiences that people may want on a plethora of devices. Microsoft has Game Pass, right? That streams all those games. I mean, it's becoming much more feasible and cost effective to deliver that. Those two things, I think, are a big part of what's changing the landscape for 3D worlds.
Nick, one question for you. How important is VR to Rec Room versus being able to connect to it from other places?
So Rec Room started as a VR app and is probably, if not the largest, like one of the largest. It's probably one of the only VR apps with millions of VR monthly users. It's still a small part of the overall audience, like maybe in the teens percentage. But we think it's a growth market. We think that there will be more and more of these headsets in the future. But I don't think we're in danger of like all wearing headsets for 20 hours a day anytime soon. That seems fairly unlikely to me. So I think it will remain a use case that's maybe once a week for a very dedicated group of people. And I think whatever world you're building, you need a way for it to be accessible from the devices that we have and use all the time: computers, consoles, phones.
Yeah. What about Microsoft? Obviously, there's a big investment in HoloLens in general with Teams and Office. What are some of the breakthroughs that enable the ways that people are working in digital spaces today?
Yeah, I mean, well, everyone has learned to work in digital spaces over the last couple of years. And so that's already kind of broken down, I'd say, barriers, because people assume I'm going to be, as you said, on a Zoom call, on a Teams call. And as we've been working with customers and kind of understanding how work is going to change, a lot of it is bringing some of those technologies where people are already working. And so in Teams, there's over 270 million monthly active users. People go there every day. They say, I used to go to the office. Now I go to Teams. It's their home for work. And so in light of that, bringing some of those, kind of new immersive technology experiences into Teams is helping people adopt the technology. I remember the first time I started showing avatars, and showing up even as an avatar myself in Teams. A lot of my colleagues were uncomfortable. They thought it was kind of weird. I thought it was kind of weird. And then I made it available to my kids and all their friends, and they're like, yes, I love the avatars, and that's all they want to represent themselves as. And it's kind of, exactly what Nick was saying. If you want to appeal to the younger generations and how they are comfortable working and participating, they're used to avatars. I mean, my kids have Snapchat where every other day I feel like they're changing their avatar and, using different ways to represent themselves is really critical. So things that feel uncomfortable to us are actually very normalized in the younger generations. Over, I think, 50% of Gen Z and millennials expect to spend some time in the metaverse in the next 2 years at work. And so, once again, bringing those more immersive experiences is going to align to how they're going to expect to work, because they've engaged in these kind of virtual worlds in gaming, and they think the workplace should also provide those types of scenarios.
We'd love to follow that one up with just, you mentioned being at this conference years ago and kind of introducing some of these streaming things, showing this to your kids. 10 years from now, what do physical and digital spaces look like? What are the big changes that we can preview for the audience today?
Can I go first?
Yeah.
I have given talks where I've talked about holographic display panels. I have more slides, probably not for today, but there's a company called Lightfield Lab that just got an investment from like Samsung or maybe LG. They're a partner of ours. They're building the Star Trek holodeck, right? You will not need glasses, and you will not need glasses with this display. It needs a lot of GPU power, but it becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It will be the cost of a normal TV. You see Google with their streaming booth or whatever, which is a version of that. But this stuff that Lightfield Lab is doing is so good that you will be able to experience things volumetrically without wearing glasses, without wearing anything. Just go into a room, look out a window, and it'll be anything that you want. Now, when you get there, this is not 20 years away. This is this decade. I mean, certainly in location-based entertainment, and then it'll be in 100-inch holographic display panels. And then at some point, I would imagine in the 2030s, you're going to have wallpaper holographic experiences where it's just your entire room is the holodeck. It's just that close. So I think that's a huge part of the future. I think somewhere between here and 2035, you're going to get really good lightweight AR glasses, that are they're no different than sunglasses. Those will be very impactful as well. That's when I think anything that's volumetric becomes mainstream short of a holographic display. I'd say those two trends are fundamental for hardware in the future. And there's plenty of software that can be done to AI, NFTs, all those things are massive influences on the future of where all this is going probably in the next 3 to 5 years.
Nicole?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. There's going to be some things like the physical is not going away. I mean, I think one of the things that I've seen is that there's so much about physically connecting. I mean, you're experiencing at this conference, you are engaging with people, you're meeting people, you're building social bonds. That is something that is going to be essential. I'd say at like a company level of big organizations around the world, I'm seeing lots of shifts already happening where like those big headquarters that used to exist are going away. REI actually in the Bellevue area, they were building this large headquarters during the pandemic. They actually decided, you know what, we're selling that thing off. Instead, we're going to have a bunch of spoke kind of hubs or locations around the area so that employees can come in the office, connect, work together, brainstorm, ideate some of the things that you want to happen in the kind of physical world more naturally, but it's not going to be this big, massive retail investment that you've seen in the past. Now you start to get into all the other technologies and how they really evolve. The physical and virtual will absolutely be blurring more and more. And as technology democratizes, the hardware is now more accessible. I think we'll start to have a lot more blending of some of those experiences. The one other area I would just kind of call out that maybe is a little bit different is I mentioned a bit about well-being and how we've seen just people struggling with some of the always on, being in virtual experiences all the time. I think technology is going to get smarter too on our well-being. We're going to have biometric kind of readers that understand, are we getting exhausted? Are we getting tired? Are we getting angry? And is that going to impact colors, shapes, smells, other experiences we have if we're working, from home or in various locations? And so I think there's going to be a lot more that's going to happen on how the human is responding to the technology and then how that can really be impacted through some other experiences of AI and powered by AI and beyond.
So back in 2011, I started working on Microsoft HoloLens, and back then I was convinced that surely 10 years later we would all be wearing these holographic computers on our heads. So I've been like deeply wrong about this in the past. I think the thing that I learned from that is that human behavior change actually lags technological innovation by quite a bit. If you think about Uber, all of that technology was there for a long time. Like I had a BlackBerry Curve, it had GPS. People had cell phones, there were cars. Why did it take us so long to do it? I think you see this kind of everywhere. Like we all could have been working from home 10 years ago. We had all of these tools. It just took some sort of large event for these things to change. And I think the same thing will be true now. So I think if you want to know what the workplace looks like in 10 years, you probably want to look at what your kids are doing now. So I was using AOL Instant Messenger and ICQ when I was 12. My dad was not using IM at work. I think if you look at most workplaces right now, they're all using Slack or Teams or something that is instant messaging. And I think it's just because those kids grew up. Now they're in the workplace. Now they expect to be able to communicate like that. So look at how they're communicating now. And I think that's probably what the workplace looks a lot more like in 10 years.
Yeah, we'd love to have you double click on that one. You mentioned in the prep call, if you lived a quarter of your life during COVID, you'd have a very different perspective on digital spaces versus people who have opportunities to work in physical spaces their entire career. What types of behavior are you seeing from kids who have spent most of their time online?
The biggest one that, and I don't have kids old enough to know if this is true, it's just I've heard it from a lot of people, is the demand to get a driver's license has lessened tremendously. Like I feel like I was at the DMV like counting down the seconds because that was freedom. Like I couldn't go anywhere without opt-in from a parent. Like I was kind of going back and forth between school and home. And so freedom for me was a driver's license. I think now with the internet and with digital spaces, that demand is not as great because these kids already have this feeling of freedom. They can go anywhere. They can go and interact with anyone without a parent's involvement. It's just in a digital space.
Nicole, on the Microsoft side, how does Microsoft think about building products for the younger generation? I know all the schools are using Teams, and that's probably a great way to get introduced to Microsoft products, but just generally, how does the product development process work there?
Actually, it's very much built on exactly what Nick said is, we know the younger generations, like they grew up with digital technologies. They've grown up using devices and playing games, and there was no life pre-technology in the sense for them. So we get lots of signals and a lot of insights from the younger generations, and therefore their expectations for their work environment is to very much align with it. So, I mean, it hits on everything we just said, which is, you need to be able to do things like these game-like experiences, but in a work environment. So how do you bring those technologies into the tools that are likely to be used in the workplace, but then ensure they're more, I think a lot of our attention, though, is on security, privacy. A lot of the top concerns when it comes to the metaverse already today, because, that is, I think a lot of the outstanding questions, especially lacking the industry-wide standards that are not quite in place yet.
Makes sense.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
What's the role of centralization and decentralization across this new realm? To what Microsoft has become almost a dominant force in this field, from games to HoloLens and all these ventures. At the same time, Jules has got a blockchain technology that he's using that distributes and decentralizes. I'm interested in the forces for centralization and decentralization and interoperation and entrepreneurial challenges. How is this going to play out? Is it going to be all Microsoft, or will blockchains redistribute the power in this new realm?
Can I start? Or speaking on the decentralization part of it, we have a very specific mission with our company and our project, which is to decentralize GPU compute. We have Azure and GCP and AWS as partners. It is just not enough. It is too expensive because NVIDIA, their prices are pretty high. So everything you're seeing was rendered on average users' machines. We just pay those costs out as if we were paying Amazon or Google or Microsoft, but a fraction of that. And because people are used to mining Ethereum, we have millions of GPUs versus the tens of thousands you'd have in a centralized cloud. And the other thing is that, and this was shocking to the movie studio when they realized that they were using our services to render their films. Oh my goodness, your frames from your movie was rendered on November 21st. Here's the Ethereum thing on the ledger that shows that. You now have an NFT. Everything's an NFT when you're rendering it, and it's all, the provenance is built in. So this is important because there's kids now that have taught younger generations, they just buy our tools. Now it's on the iPad, now it's going to be on your phone, and they make an NFT. They follow people, who's one of my friends and obviously does pretty well in the NFT space, and they make $1 million selling a piece of artwork done in our software because there's provenance on chain. So from those kinds of perspectives of what can be done with provenance, with compute, and frankly even earning money, I think NFTs are a lot like the metaverse. There's a lot of bad, weird stuff going on that people don't, that aren't quite related to art and creativity, but when it is done right, I think it's very powerful. So I do think there's also a lot of craziness in the crypto space, and we just look at what happened in the last 2 days, how crazy that is. I was just at the Solana conference giving a talk. Solana is entangled with FTX and all that. So it's sort of perilous. On the other hand, this shall pass, right? And you'll have something that I think is very powerful in the decentralized space. And I don't think that means centralization goes away. They just work hand in hand. That's my opinion on that.
If I can just add to this, my idol here, to his question. I think, the metaverse, his question pertains also to another issue, and that is the enormous power of engagement of this technology. So it is very powerful, and people can be manipulated easily in that realm. Jane McGonigal, yes, she studied that, working gaming as future work ground, gaming as, in the holodeck as future work ground. And her last book, Imaginable, How to Create a Hopeful Future, shows how, in my opinion, the metaverse can be used to change the narrative from the hopeless, which our initial keynote speaker today showed, to an answer to Mr. Tupi's question. So how do we give back the hopeful future to our young generation? So I think it's such a powerful tool, and I just want to ask you, why are we building the metaverse? And of course, how are we building it? Is Microsoft going to shift the young generation perspective? Are you? I am a Star Trek fan, and I really ticked at your...
Yes, Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry's vision is a great way
I am sold on it. I mean, you can take me anywhere, but where will you take me? That's a question. I think that pertains to the centralization and decentralization question.
It would be pretty cool to hear about the creators on Rec Room and how they think about using Rec Room as a platform to distribute their content, but also how you create these opportunities for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll zoom in on one part of your question, which is like, why are we building this? Like, what's the point? So, as I mentioned earlier, Rec Room has millions of different rooms. They are generally built by people in their teen years. These are not developers. These are not professionals. But some of them are making more than their parents building these rooms and publishing them in Rec Room. So I think, one, there is this economic enablement that we think is really powerful, and I think that does inspire a lot of hope in these folks. I think so much of the bad behavior that you see out of younger...
That's a question.
Well, I think so many...
It's economic power. So.
Well, I think so much of the bad behavior that, people see in adolescence is like a desire to have an effect on the world. That's what graffiti is. That's what vandalism is. It's like, I'm going around the world and I want to have some power to impact or control it. And I think what we're trying to do is redirect that in a more positive direction. It's like, come and create one of these worlds, build a business, like reach a whole globe of people. And I think that's really hard in a physical world. Like, you are not enabled to do that in any way as a 13-year-old, but I think you are in a digital realm. And so why build this? It's a place where, anyone can go and connect with anyone else, where anyone very cheaply can go and do millions of different things. So there's a lot of reach that comes with that. I would say it's not without challenges, and that's one of the reasons that I believe centralization will always play some role. I think it's very hard to have a really robust trust and safety system without centralization. And so when I look at what is the role of decentralization versus centralization, I don't know what the role of decentralization will ultimately be in Rec Room, but I can tell you centralization will be a large role in how we have trust and safety, how we have safety for children, how we authenticate users and make sure that we are tamping down bad actions inside the ecosystem.
On the topic of centralization, there's an interesting stat that came out over the last few weeks that Meta is planning to invest as much in the metaverse and developing the metaverse as the U.S. spent on the Apollo space program. Apollo space program, yeah, $250 billion in today dollars. How do you all think about how important it is for these centralized companies, the Microsofts and Metas of the world, to invest in digital spaces and build these enabling technologies for other companies?
I'll start by saying I think it is important. It depends on the company. But if you look at, just Apple's foray towards augmented reality. They don't have a pair of glasses out yet, but they've spent a lot of time and effort on sensors. You have a LiDAR scanner in your phone. Just the fact that they're pushing the hardware that far. HoloLens is great. Alex Kipman's work is great. I think that you need that. You need the hardware to advance, and so sometimes it takes, a $1 trillion company to help make that happen. I think that's important. I don't think that goes away at all, and I think that, I have issues with how, Meta handles your privacy. I would not want that company, scanning in my eye tracking data. That is a very bad idea. But other than that, I worked with John Carmack for years on the Gear VR, with Oculus, and I love that work. So there is some good in all that, and I do think you need that investment in the hardware platforms, other tools to make this really happen.
I think what we're looking at here is the next internet-sized opportunity. I think if you believe that the future of software does not look like a tile on a screen, if you believe that, 20 years from now, your kids are not going to be carrying around a black piece of glass in their pocket, that there's something else there, then we need to rebuild essentially every piece of software we have. It's not a tile that doesn't interact with the other tiles. It's a room, it's an object, it's an avatar, and they all have to interact with each other. It's the biggest software integration project that's ever existed. So if you believe that that's happening, then that amount of money is not a crazy amount of money to spend on, what is essentially an unlimited TAM market. So I think that's really the question is not, is this a prudent thing to do or not? It's like, is the market large enough to support that sort of investment and in that time frame?
Timing is everything.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing.
Yeah, so one of my favorite questions always is what can possibly go wrong? It's not a fun topic at a cocktail party, but you've all talked about teens driving the next thing, and we all know that the teenage brain might not be fully developed, and should we follow them into the future? I like the vision, but I don't mind asking, are you thinking about embedding ethics? How do you think about that when you think about giving people more of what they want? We've seen that on Twitter. The algorithms, reinforce your biases. And so is there any thought in any of your endeavors to sort of think ahead on unintended consequences and what could possibly go wrong?
I think one of the things that we invested in super early was becoming COPPA compliant. So I think that's one of the ways that we've handled this is we've tried to build in trust and safety from the very, very beginning. But I think one of the things that I'm hoping for is I think a lot of the social software that we have today is actually not very social, and that's the problem. If you think about the best memory you've had from the last year, you were probably in some social setting. In the real world, you were probably skiing with your kids or something like that. No one's best moment of the past year was scrolling through Twitter, right? Not a single person had their best memory on social software. But if you check with your kids and you ask them where their best memory was for the past year, probably was in the digital space. So I think what we're trying to do is actually steer us away from some of the dystopic paths we've already gone with social, where we're sort of giving you the social dopamine hit, but you're not actually having the synchronous social experience. I still think there's a lot that can go wrong, and I think the real question for us is what can we learn by looking at the social media spaces right now and how they integrated, I think, trust and safety kind of late. Like, I think the early days of the internet were very, hey, let anyone say anything, it'll sort itself out. I don't know if everyone feels that way anymore. And then I think the other angle that we've learned is, like, advertising in these spaces is very poisonous. You have multiple different agendas all of a sudden. It's very difficult to balance, and your user, your companies, like, it's hard enough to keep those two groups in alignment, but then when you add a third group that's like an advertiser, it's very difficult to make trade-offs there. And so I think when you look at a lot of the ways that these businesses are being built right now, advertising is not as core a part of it as I think you see the broader internet. I think that'll come with its own challenges as well, though.
I'm also hopeful when it comes more into the business and work environment that it's going to push a lot more of the focus on security, privacy. Companies we're going to acquire, ensuring, because their brands are going to be associated with it. So it's less of a free-for-all, and that really pushes companies and organizations to come together with the right set of standards and requirements to really ensure that what this technology is doing is serving a grander purpose and moving us forward versus, kind of turning to some of the more disastrous potential outcomes that we could see from some of this technology.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to in terms of the worst that can happen. I'll start with what I think we have to be careful about right now, which is that eye tracking stuff. Eye tracking, whether it's Apple's glasses, right, if they ever make some, or Facebook's glasses, Meta's glasses, that data is such an insight into how you think. And you could do a feedback loop where you watch something in the metaverse or in the 3D world based on your eye tracking. It's way too dangerous. And you had companies that have clearly shown, like Meta, that they're not responsible with how they handle ads, how they accelerate people's emotions and dopamine reactions to things. So I think that you have to make sure that when you get to a pair of glasses with eye tracking, that data is secured. It is not used in a negative way. There should be laws against that. That to me feels one of the greatest dangers that's right ahead of us is that.
Thank you very much. I honestly think that each of you is trying to advance the betterment of the world with your efforts and doing it without malice and with good intent and providing meaning both for your lives and our lives. But you don't get to be my age without learning the validity of a certain amount of paranoia. And to achieve globalization without centralization, I think, is essential, because you have to see if there's a creeping governance issue or people taking over what values and what ethics are promoted worldwide. So it becomes the question, can we have, I can't express it clearly, but it's very much the idea of centralization. It's ask this question twice: who decides, and who decides who decides?
I mean, in the world of Star Trek, they figured it out in the future. That's why. That's one of the reasons why I love Gene Roddenberry's work. So that's what I'd like to see happen.
Thanks for the presentations, and agree. I appreciate the work that you all are doing. But I'm probably going to sound like a grumpy millennial for a few minutes. I'm a father of 4. I have no interest in my kid having relationships and having a life built online. My kids are going to play with construction paper and glue and pipe cleaners the way they did, because we know the results of that. The early results that we have from 2020, 2021, of what happens to these kids when they spend all of their time in a virtual environment is not good. So that's the question to you is, first off, will there be an adverse reaction as we learn what's actually happening to these kids? And second thing, how do you feel about that?
I'll start with, I completely agree with you that the physical space, physical play, interacting with other kids and objects that are outside of the digital world is essential for development. And I have 2 kids, and absolutely, not even a question. I think the digital space can also provide supplementary or additional types of experiences that create true wonderment and creativity for children as well. As parents, we make collective decisions of how much time that is that you feel comfortable and whether or not you want to bring your kids into those environments. I think the reality is that it is the world. Like, I'm a parent who controls a lot of the digital experiences of my kids, of like not always being on, but the world around them is digitally connected and engaged. And so you need to help train them and teach them and guide them to be smart and be knowledgeable about the technology and how to use it safely, how to use it in a way that is highly, like one of my daughters is a very, very creative, and she's, building and designing things in digital spaces that are really blowing my mind. And she really gets energy from that. She's able to share that with others in really energetic ways that bring back a positive impact on her life. But yes, I think we've yet to see exactly what is that right length of time, what's the right, mix so that our children thrive, the next generation thrives. But I don't know, Nick.
Yeah, I think, one, when we use the term children, I think we're obscuring a lot, like a spectrum there. Like a 17-year-old is very different than a 12-year-old. A 12-year-old is very different than a 2-year-old. And I think the amount of time that you're spending in the digital realm is very, very different for each of those age groups. I can remember when I was younger, my parents were deeply concerned that I was spending time on the computer and this thing that they had just heard of called the internet, and how unhealthy and unsafe that was. And, they were both right and wrong. Like it was in the Wild West and unsafe, and maybe I shouldn't have been in ICQ chat rooms as a 13-year-old. But it was also like some of the most formative learning experiences that I had about who I was and what my personality was and what I eventually wanted to do with the rest of my life. And so I think that's the tension of growing up, and that's the tension of being a parent and having a child, is trying to determine when your child is able to take advantage of these things that have both, pros and cons. I would not be here saying that I think the digital spaces have no drawbacks at all. But I think it's really for parents to decide, like, when are their kids ready and for how much of it. So I think from my perspective, like the thing that we try and build in is like, look, there's parental controls in here. So you want to lock your kid out of here, you can. If you want to lock your kid out from interacting with other people, you can. If you want to set some time limit on here, you can do that.
We're at our time, but if you can do something rapid fire. No. If I can, the gentleman's been waiting, I apologize, but very quickly.
Okay, I am not the Matt Levine from Bloomberg. In the past, we went to work, we punched our clock. Pilots are limited as to how much time they're allowed to spend flying. Truckers are limited with how much time they're allowed to drive a truck by law. How will a 24-hour, ever always-on world affect human psychology? We can measure biometrics, but how will it affect us when it's always available? When will we be able to shut it off?
Any fast answer to that question, guys?
I think we already have that.
Okay.
I could say one
go
thing
ahead,
really
Nicole.
quickly. What I would say, let's just say in the work environment, I'm not going to put it all our complete lives perspective. Like what I have seen in organizations that are thriving, it's not just about the technology, it's about the policies and the practices that leaders put in place in their organization. I do not allow anyone in my org to send emails outside of work hours or send any Teams chat outside of work hours unless it's literally a customer who is in an urgent situation. No one sends mails on weekends or on holidays. Like we put a lot of standards and practices in place because we know collectively we can be always on. It's very easy to be always on. So I think it really is about how do you marry technology with policies and practices that can help us be thriving human beings, be connected, and also truly disconnect. Go for the hike, go for the kind of engaging experiences that bring out creativity and also ensure mental health.